All right, so hello and welcome to our second lecture in the Labs for Liberation Summer Institute lecture series. My name is Angela Stanley, and I am the accessibility coordinator for the Labs for Liberation, and today I will also be the moderator for this session. I am a brown-skinned Black woman wearing glasses, they're very glary right now, with Black over-the-ear headphones, and dark hair and a Black shirt. We're happy to have you all with us today, but before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping details. We will have card captioning as well as ASL interpretation. For those who wish to engage with the captions in a separate window, I'm going to place the link in the chat. There now. It will take you to a separate window where you can view all of the captions. You can change the color, size, and font that these are presented to you. Our ASL interpreters are currently pinned in the center of the screen to your right. To ensure you see the interpreters, please change your view to side-by-side gallery. This is when the speakers start to share their screens. As mentioned in our communications, we have enabled the Q&A function for this webinar, so you can ask any questions that you might have. We will also be having a dedicated question and answer period following the presentation and after a 5-minute break. This meeting will be 2 hours long, so please stretch, move, or otherwise listen to your body's needs to enable you to engage fully in the space. The other way that we ask you to engage with the lecture is through our Discord channel. For those who have not signed up yet, we will provide you with a link at the end of the session, and you can use this to join. If you've recently sent your request, acceptance to the Discord will be granted following the meeting. And we will have folks monitoring the channels to ensure that everyone is comfortably engaging in the space. For today's event, Walker Brewer will be your access doula. So please reach out to them if you have any sort of access issues. It's clearly stated in their name, access doula in brackets. As a reminder, this and all future lectures will be recorded. For accessibility and privacy reasons, we ask that any screenshots, notes, or other recorded materials that you have only be used for your personal learning and educational purposes. In seeking to build a consent-based community, we ask that you seek and gain consent from our speakers, lecturers, etc., before sharing their work. To model this, we have permission from our speakers to share recordings of these lectures with our Summer Institute participants, including our study buddies. If the lectures later become available to the wider community, we will post about this in social media or send you an email. So with all this in mind, without further ado, I'll pass it over to our Institute directors, Amy Hemray and Moya Bailey.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy Hemray. I'm an olive-skinned transmasculine person with short, dark, curly hair and blue glasses. I'm wearing a black t-shirt. And on behalf of the Labs for Liberation team, I want to extend a warm welcome to all of you to the lecture series and the Summer Institute on Disability and Design. As we talked about last week, our goal for the summer is to explore emerging and critical approaches to access, which are rooted in Black feminist disability studies, critical access studies, disability justice, design friction, social practice, and today, critical studies of science and technology. We hope that everyone enjoys the lecture and gets to kind of explore some of the things that are a little messy and sticky about access. So before we start the lecture, I'm going to pass it over to Moya.
Hello, everyone. I am Moya. I am wearing a black t-shirt that says Stand with Black Women. I am a brown-skinned Black woman with natural hair and glasses. I am joining you all, and we are recording this webinar via digital devices that are linked over Turtle Island. I live in the traditional unceded homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, though many other tribes call this area home. We are in a global community with many of you in spaces where the traditional stewards of the land have been displaced. We recognize that land acknowledgements are not enough. And with that in mind, we take wisdom from Indigenous elders who make clear that acknowledgements can be used as a tool to make people feel like they've done their work. We don't believe that here, but we can easily forget that because we are in a digital space, that the hardware that connects us is made from materials extracted from often stolen land and mined by exploited people around the world. So when we discuss our work and its social justice implications, we cannot forget the too often invisibilized logics of settler colonialism and the land, labor, and love that went into making this lecture series possible. So in addition to acknowledging the land that supports this global Labs for Liberation project, we work to make sure our work supports the descendants of those whose enslaved labor make this space possible. We acknowledge the labor of enslaved Africans and their descendants who've enriched this region of the world with cultural and economic contributions that can never truly be quantified. We add to this remembrance and acknowledgement of the Congolese miners who mine the minerals that power our digital devices and the Zhengzhou Foxconn factory workers that make these devices. The exploited labor of people around the planet is supplemented by the love that went into making this event possible. Many thanks to my co-conspirator, Amy, Angela, Walker, and other members of the Labs for Liberation team today. Thank you to the Mellon Foundation and our respective institutions for helping to make this event possible. But thank you to the ancestors, scholars, activists, and contemporary organizers that their love made this possible. So I'm just going to show a quick picture of some of those ancestors that I'm talking about, as well as contemporary organizers on which we build for our work today. If you are part of the Discord channel, you will also be able to see this image, and also all of these people are listed as to who they are in that space. In an ongoing pandemic, amidst genocides, wars, what's happening in the Sudan, ecological devastation, it can be overwhelming to think about doing business as usual. So I want us to think about our time together as a little pocket of possibility, a buoyant bubble in a world on fire. So with that, I'd like to take us back to Amy to talk a bit about the Discord server that I just mentioned.
Thank you, Moya. So this call is a webinar, and you can submit questions through the Q&A function. The chat will not take place here for accessibility reasons, but if you have registered for the talk, you should get a link to join the Discord server where there's a dedicated channel for discussing the lecture. So you can click on the lecture chat for that. And I'll pass it back to Moya to talk about the code of conduct.
We've created a code of conduct as a way to talk through some of the issues that might come up. I'm going to read to you just the first part of this, which is a summary of the longer code of conduct. And as it's linked in the chat, you can read the whole thing. Labs for Liberation is committed to promoting a considerate and respectful environment focused on collaboration, accessibility, communication, curiosity, and generosity. We are dedicated to creating a consent-based anti-harassment culture rooted in principles of disability justice. And with that, I'm going to turn it to Angela.
Thank you, folks. And so we'll get started today. And I just want to introduce our two speakers. We have with us today Ashley Shew and Damien P. Williams. So Ashley is a professor of science, technology, and society at Virginia Tech, a philosopher of technology, and the author of Against Technoableism. Damien P. Williams is an assistant professor of philosophy and data science at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, author of the chapter Disabling AI, Biases and Values of Artificial Intelligence in the Handbook on Ethics of Artificial Intelligence. We welcome them today and look forward to your talk.
Thank you so much for hosting us. I should screen share? Yes. Okay. Sorry, as soon as I screen share, it goes into that mode where everything's covered up by the Zoom toolbar. uh, all right, are you guys seeing my slides or are you seeing the presenter view?
We are seeing the presenter view.
Oh, well, goodness. All right. Hey, everybody. Escape. We should have practiced this part. Slideshow. I just want to play it. But everything's hidden by things from Zoom. All right, here we are. Yes. All right. Are you seeing what you should see now?
Yes, we can just see the slides.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. I'm really excited to be here with my colleague Damien to be talking about technoableism, cyborgs, and infrastructure. Damien said I could start out with a long anecdote. So this is really his fault. I'm exhausted today. And my hands got covered in like oil grease from my leg. I decided as I was out on my walk this morning with my dog that I was really uncomfortable. I got a new liner to my prosthetic socket made. I got the prescription. It was time. My other one had deformed a little bit, but it was still very comfortable. But I've been like sinking into my socket. So I'm touching like the bottom of my socket in a way I'm not supposed to. And so I get a new like flexible liner to sit inside my socket. And I spend 8 hours in the car for 30 minutes of picking it up because it's modeled after my last one. Because it's not as if the shape of my leg has changed. The liner itself is worn out and deformed over time. So I got a new one. I'm wearing the new one. It is uncomfortable to walk. It is so squeezy. I had gotten used to the way in which my old one was deformed. And even though I touch the bottom in ways that I shouldn't, I am about to leave town for about 2 weeks. And I have the directions for how to put the old liner back into my socket. And so it's a two-person job. I call my 16-year-old over and we spend a while trying to get the new liner out to put the old liner in, and it is a job. I end up getting grease on my face because I touch my face with very greasy hands, like trying to wipe off the sweat as we're trying to put this new liner in. And the thing is, I have amazing access and great insurance coverage because I'm a state employee and I have everything done right. And I'm still having this time this morning, and I am physically exhausted from trying to pull out this, like it's suctioned in, right? It was really hard for two people to do, to pull out this one, like well-fitted liner to a prosthetic socket and put in the old one. The old one was really hard to get in. And and we did it, and I'm back in my old liner. And I've gone through all of this trouble just to be back in my old liner. Um, and when I think about like what it is to be a disabled person, sometimes it's just that. Like I am lucky that I am strong enough to do this work, like to get my liner in and out, that I don't have to go to another prosthetic appointment, that I don't have to wait more time. This is, I have privilege in all of these ways, and I'm still very, very frustrated as a cyborg today. I don't know if you can see, like I have grease underneath my nails, even though I've scrubbed. I was really worried. I was wearing a nice outfit for you guys. And I was really worried about getting grease on myself when I realized what was happening. My kid was like all upset because they don't like the texture on their hands as we're trying to yank and pull this thing out. And the thing is, what we're going to be talking about today is things that cyborgs know that like are really hard to capture for other people. And this is a very specific thing today. But here's our plan for the session between me and Damien. We're going to talk about technoableism. I'll describe it pretty briefly. Damien's going to tell you about disabled knowledge, or disabled knowledge is. And then we're going to share some work about cyborg concern cases, sort of trading off in some of those presentations. And then we're going to talk about what cyborgs know. And sometimes it's frustration. And then we're going to talk about this project that Damien and I have also through a Mellon Foundation grant, thanks to the Mellon Foundation, where we're trying to better capture disabled accounts of technology, disabled critiques of technology that aren't normally represented. All right. So technoableism. Um, what is technoableism? I actually have to talk about what ableism is to talk about what technoableism is. This might be a definition that some of you are already familiar with. So this is the T.L. Lewis 2022 definition of ableism. Ableism is a system of assigning value to people's bodies and minds based on societally constructed ideas of normalcy, productivity, desirability, intelligence, excellence, and fitness. These constructed ideas are deeply rooted in eugenics, anti-Blackness, misogyny, colonialism, imperialism, and capitalism. This systemic oppression that leads to people and society determining people's value based on their culture, age, language, appearance, religion, birth, or living place, health/wellness, and/or their ability to satisfactorily reproduce, excel, and behave. You do not have to be disabled to experience ableism. Now, we could spend several semesters or years breaking down every component of this particular definition. But this idea of that ableism represents a system, a hierarchy of value, something Fiona Kumar Campbell talks about as a trajectory of perfection, right? That there are some bodies that are more perfectible, more perfect than others, and that we should base some sort of valuation on ideas about what a good body or a good mind are, is sort of at the base of this. So then what is technoableism? It sort of plays off of this idea of ableism, and technoableism is something we see represented fairly often in our media sphere, and even in sort of entertainment as well. So not just news, but different stories created for different purposes. So technoableism is a phenomenon where helpers and medical professionals and engineers offer their expertise to help disabled people, where ableism is actually re-emphasized through the solutions or the ideas that are offered, right? Their idea that a disabled person needs this intervention And it's often led to the idea that disabled people want and need intervention pretty much writ large. And the idea that technology is how we're going to empower disabled people to overcome question marks, with the background assumption being that disabled body minds are broken, suboptimal, inferior, or calling out for help. And it's seen in marketing about disability technologies really frequently. Disabled people are told technologies will change our lives. We're never told to expect incremental improvements. It's always got to be like radically life-changing. And here I am fighting with my leg to get my flexi liner in and out. It's hard to imagine, what it would be to just say, oh, we're going to come up with better materials, right? We're going to, have a better process. We're going to make things easy to do. Usually we're introduced to whole new systems. Um, and we also witness technoableism in that we don't hear a lot of stories about disabled designers, right? We hear about disabled people as the objects of design or recipients of technology, but never as the people who create technologies. We see it in feel-good news stories about technologies for good. Disabled people are often talked about in these stories without being interviewed. It's almost a trope. I laugh at so many different news articles these days where it's like, oh, they're gonna tell me about this life-changing technology and then avoid ever asking a disabled person about it. And I've seen whole interviews where they've tried to get the disabled person to say, this is life-changing, and they fail to, right? And then they take some quote out of context and run with that as the headline. And we also see it in presumptions about our management as technologized disabled people as cyborgs. Our participation or our lack of participation in infrastructure and corporate care comes with significant risks that amplify our vulnerability. So we'll be dealing with some of these in our cyborg cases in just a minute. But to give you more background here, I'm going to pass it to Damien for a minute.
Thank you, Ashley. If you wouldn't mind being the keeper of the slides for this, I appreciate that. So as Ashley said, we're going to be talking about disabled knowledges. The plural on knowledges is intentional because what we're looking at are multiple different ways of being and knowing in the world. And a lot of the work that we do takes this kind of core idea from Sins Invalid, looking at these 10 principles of disability justice. The ones that, and they're all deeply important, but the ones that we kind of focus on here are highlighted on the screen. Leadership of the most impacted, recognizing wholeness, and commitment to cross-disability solidarity. The very first principle here is intersectionality, though, and that requires a recognition of multiple different ways of being and knowing in the world. No two people are going to have exactly the same experience of being and knowing and being impacted by the world around us, the world that we all live in and make together. And so that framework of knowledges, of knowing things in multiple plural ways, kind of plays through all of these principles. This notion of leadership of those most impacted, we are led by those who most know these systems. Right? Is Laura Levins Morales quote. Who better to take the lead, to be centered, to drive the direction of understanding and research than those who experience it and know it most directly? As Ashley said, so much of this work is often done by saying, here, take this thing that we have made for you. Take this thing that we have designed about you and use it. Just take it, rather than actually asking the people who need it, for whom it is supposed to be made, hey, do you actually want this? Do you actually need this? Is this good for you? What do you want? And even then, that kind of asking, when it does happens as something of an afterthought. Recognizing wholeness, this notion of each person that we work with, that we encounter, is not to be commodified, is not to be extracted from, is meant to be recognized as they are. This person has their own history, their own experience that makes them who they are. And the whole of that, rather than one component of that, is what makes the difference. And then again, this commitment to cross disability solidarity, this notion that, as it says, we honor the insights and participation of all of our community members, knowing that isolation undermines collective liberation. Right? And so this idea that we can't simply say one person speaks for all, one disabled lived experience, one disabled embodiment can capture every person's embodiment. That's not real. That's not right. But also, as a result of that, the notion that when we do seek to work, we must work within multiple modes. We reach to each other to experience the wholeness of the full breadth of our community. Go to the next slide. One of the reasons that we focus on this comes from this notion of epistemic injustice. Epistemic justice is this goal, the idea that we should be seeking to center the knowledges, the lived experience as a valid kind of knowledge of people who have been systemically precluded from being able to share that knowledge. Epistemology is a philosophical term that means the study of knowledge, and this notion of epistemic justice, as many of you probably know, it comes from this idea of making sure that certain types of people aren't excluded as knowers. In epistemic injustice, what we tend to have is that certain types of knowledge, certain ways of knowing, certain kinds of people are not viewed as valid sources or holders of knowledge. And as a result, any contribution that they may make is devalued or dismissed out of hand. This happens along racial and gender lines. It happens about anybody who tries to speak about their own lived experience, and it especially happens in the realm of disability. On the right here, we have the screenshot of this paper, I'm Just Terrified for My Future, Epistemic Violence in Disability-Related Technology Research. That specifically highlights this framework of the ways that disabled people are both experimented upon, but then extracted from, rather than being valued as knowers in their own right. Outside non-disabled expertise is enacted on disabled people more often than enabled people get to be knowers, get to be valued as experts. And that has real harmful and long-lasting consequences. Go to the next slide. Most disabled people are multiply disabled or will become multiply disabled. And most research and stories about disability only select for one disability type. This framework means that because the people doing the research do not understand the basic lived reality of being disabled, they miss these kind of crucial aspects of disabled lived experience. These facts of what it will mean to exist as a disabled person over the course of our life. And so they miss kind of fundamental understandings that might otherwise be obvious to those who do live this every day, those who are lived experiential experts. This then is why we have to think in terms of cross disability and cross community access. Who should you ask to be involved? Whose voices are missing from these processes? And who gets counted as the expert and the authority in these matters? Here, I'll pass it back to Ashley.
Thanks so much, Damien. We have a number of cyborg concern cases. So this is the sort of background that Damien and I are thinking about in our work, thinking about some of the principles of disability justice, specifically as they relate to disability technologies and research, right? I think all of the principles are really important. We end up talking about epistemic justice, which I would link to some of the highlighted things from earlier as being really important in the work that we're doing and the way we're trying to set up research differently than it's been done before. But how is like the question is, well, why set things up differently? We have a number of cases that I think are really, I mean, some of these cases I find very, very disturbing. Just as someone who's, I mean, parts of my body are owned by corporations. Parts of my body are reported back to by doctors. Many components of my body, whether we're talking like the pills that I take and join my body, or, my hearing aids or my prosthetic limb, these are things that are managed in corporate care, in insurance schemes where, doctors get to be the authority about so many of these things. I can't just say, oh, my leg hurts, I need a new leg or I need a new component. In fact, usually I tell my prosthetist that, and then I have to contact the nurse in my surgeon's office. Now, I got my surgery 11 years ago. I contact the nurse in my surgeon's office, who then writes the prescription in the way that the prosthetic office tells her to write the prescription so it doesn't get sent back. It's a long process, is what I'm saying, in ways that don't even make sense. My self-report of, oh, this hurts me, or oh, I'm getting a blister from this isn't enough, right? It has all of this chain of command where people get to make decisions about my healthcare future. So when I'm thinking about disability research and I'm thinking about like how we set up things infrastructurally, I'm really worried about some of the ways in which disabled people and Damien is too, we're really worried about the ways in which society imagines disabled people that result in really sometimes horrific outcomes. So we're going to show you some of our cyborg concern cases. I think about these cases sort of like the work of Rua Benjamin or Meredith Broussard, where they give you case after case after case. And yes, you just have to believe them at the end that like there's racial bias in technology. I think about some of these cases along that line. We won't give you so many cases like they do, but I think these are suggestive things to think with and certainly like lurk in the background of a lot of the conversations Damien and I have about technology in the future. So cyborg concern cases, Damien, here are the questions we want you to keep in mind as we talk about these. What does it mean to be dependent on corporations or technologies or for technologies and maintenance? What is it usually like to participate in technological research as a disabled person? How do technologies shape disabled life? And how are disabled people currently experiencing our shared socio-technical systems? With that, I'll pass it over to Damien to describe some of these cases. Oh, do I have a case first? I did this wrong. Our slides are in a different order than I expected. All right.
Yeah,
The
sorry,
first one.
that's
Okay.
my bad. I apologize for that. I moved a thing and I left a note about it, but I didn't highlight it at you. That's my bad. Sorry about that.
That's all right. No, I looked this over beforehand and yeah, sorry. The first one is electronic visit verification. And usually if I were in like a classroom, I would say, how many people know what electronic visit verification is? And then no one raises their hand. And I'm hoping with this group that some of you will know what electronic visit verification is, but if you don't, that's maybe not surprising. So electronic visit verification is this thing where for people who need attendant care, personal care attendants that is paid for through Medicaid. Different states have rolled these out at different times because, of course, Medicaid is managed differently in different states. But it amounts to a cell phone that you have to keep on yourself as a disabled person, and that your personal attendant, your personal care attendant has to log in and log out of like a time clock. And it does send information like a normal cell phone sends information about location. And people have pointed to the fact that this is really problematic and it amounts to sort of state intervention and the ability for, say, state governments through Medicaid to actually like track disabled people's movements in a way that we would find a little grotesque for any other population. And it puts particular disabled people, when we talk about intersectional issues, at a particular disadvantage. So by which I mean Dom Evans has been one of the huge voices for me against electronic visit verification, and has talked about the ways in which this data, if understood by like the wrong people, could leave particularly trans disabled people at particular risk, right? If you're in a location that the state doesn't approve of, and your attendance is with you, if you need them to accompany you out or drive you or something like that, they're going to be able to know like what clinics you see. They're going to be able to know like what social groups you gather with. Hey, if you go to a protest, they're going to know where you end up. So particularly for multiply marginalized disabled people who are already scrutinized, we can imagine how this data could fall into the wrong hands. And some of the statistics, I mean, the first 6 months of the rollout, I think it was in Arkansas, um, like the 6 months before the rollout, and this is all meant to make sure that fraud doesn't happen with personal attendant services. Um, the state of Arkansas, the 6 months before the rollout, uh, the total amount of convictions for Medicaid fraud with personal care attendants was $1,930. Over 6 months, that was the most that they had recouped, and it cost, I think, something like 5.7 million to roll out the program. See how it doesn't even make sense. We care so much about policing disabled people that we're going to create these systems um, that do harm and have the potential for great harm. At the same time, we're paying like just ridiculous amounts because we're so worried about disabled people cheating, even though we know that cheating in the systems is really low. All right. Um, the next one is about Second Sight. Second Sight is Second Sight is a company that had something called the Argus 2 uh, retinal implant. It was a system that could let you, if you were someone impacted by particular types of blindness, allowed you to see a little bit more like shapes and color, darkness. It isn't the restoration of vision, but it does allow people to say cross the street more safely. Right, so some people over 350 had gotten the Argus 2 implant, and some of this reporting is quite striking, right? So for one person, they were literally crossing the street when their Argus 2 implant went out. And this all happened because Second Sight wasn't doing well as a company. They ended up first jettisoning the line of Argus 2 implants before having more and more financial troubles and eventually declaring bankruptcy. Now, what it means for the people who are already implanted with these retinal implants is that they're sort of left without any help, right? There was no one who was there to say take over the maintenance issues, or some other body to appeal to. In fact, if you wanted to get your retinal implant removed, that cost would have been on you. And also, it made it so that people, if they wanted to get an MRI, would no longer be able to because the implant was already in their head. So for people who were told this will improve your life, this is a life-changing technology, and people who adopted and were like, yeah, I like this, it's okay, they're still left in a lurch because of their participation in this particular company with this particular system. What does it mean to have certain parts that are managed and owned in the context of um, capitalist enterprises that may go bankrupt is actually pretty scary. And we've seen this with other technologies as well. And I'll loop back to that in a second. Damien?
Thank you very much for that. And yeah, every time you remind me about the MRI part, I'm a little more horrified. Um, like all of it's bad, but that part especially. Um, so one of the things that I focus on in my work is artificial intelligence in all of its varying different forms, machine learning, algorithms, and now generative AI. And I look at the ways that that shows up in various parts of people's lives, right? And so one of the things that we've always seen in AI trained and enabled resume screeners, systems that look at resumes and then automatically with AI tools kind of say who's a good fit and who's not a good fit. We've seen discrimination over and over again. With the age of generative AI, what we've seen is that that discrimination has had outsized kind of disproportionate effects on disabled populations. And so we have this piece that came out last year from Kate Glasgow et al. Kate Glasgow, Yusuf Mohammed, Ben Kosa, Venkatesh Poultry, Jennifer Mankoff, identifying and improving disability bias in GPT-based resume screening. Long and the short of it is, any disability or any mention of disability, rather, in a resume that gets screened with one of these tools gets ranked lower than a resume that doesn't mention disability. And that's the case even when the mention of disability is laudatory, is positive. They call these enhancements on resumes. When somebody has an award for disability research, or when they have a scholarship, or any other kinds of credentials based around disability, that mention of disabled or disability causes the resume screener to rank the resume lower. This means that all the things that these systems have been trained on have seen predominantly a correlation between disability and negative framings of capability. Disability in the material that these systems are trained on equals bad ability. And so if somebody mentions disability in a resume, well, then they must have bad ability. Why would you hire that person? Ranked lower. This shows up not just in resume screeners, but also in disability hiring tools. This is a report from the Center for Democracy and Technology, talking about the ways that hiring tools like automated video or screener programs and systems that are meant to be used to determine what candidate is good for a position, they have, again, disproportionately negative impact on disabled population. Tools like AI-enabled video interviewing and candidate screening systems tend to work against disabled candidates because those tools are most often made without disabled people's inputs. And so certain types of ways of sitting or eye movements or fidgeting behaviors get seen as inattention or lack of concern in spaces where we know that that's not necessarily what those behaviors mean. And yet, because they are not made by disabled people, people who have the lived experiential knowledge of what those physical embodiments and behaviors might actually indicate, you have stereotypical behaviors, you have expectations based on non-disabled people's experiences and expectations about the world imposed on disabled individuals. And so disabled candidates get hired less frequently.
Our next case comes from Michelle Friedner, and I think is really instructive in a lot of ways. This is about a particular, the reporting that she did here is about a particular cochlear implant line developed by a US company for developing world applications. So in this particular instance, she actually did reporting with a particular family in India who had the government in India had bought so many of these cochlear implants from this US company. They were at a lower price point for lower income countries. So they bought a whole bunch of these, and the child at the center of this particular reporting was 4 years old when they were implanted, and they were completely oral in their education along the way. And at age 8, in fact, this company, so after 4 years, this company decided that this line that they had made for lower income countries was in fact not making them any money. Surprise, it wasn't making them any money. They sold it as this is a nice charity thing for us to do, but they decided it was making them so little money that they were going to jettison the whole program and these technologies and no longer support their maintenance or anything that would need to be done to them. And they were not offering sort of a replacement. So these families who had implanted their children through this government program, who would have never had access to this technology otherwise, 4 years later, they are left in a situation where the cochlear implant that is physically implanted into their child um, can no longer be maintained. And the company says, well, if you would like to keep using cochlear implants, you should upgrade to one of to something that is managed, right? And so these families have all of this worry about sort of the language loss, the communication loss that's about to happen for their kids because they can no longer like they couldn't afford this in the first place. And in fact, that was why this whole line had been made in the first place. So in this particular case, Michelle Friedner, we know this term planned obsolescence, which has to do with the fact that, oftentimes our technologies are planned to have a shorter shelf life than they used to have. I think about the giant industrial dryer in the first apartment complex I lived in that was 40 years old and still drying clothes very effectively versus, the most recent clothes dryer I bought after, 6 years with the other one because it just like it wasn't worth repairing because of how the companies set this up, right? The idea that you'll need your technologies replaced more often is built into a lot of our technological infrastructure today. We think about this with different computers and cell phones, and companies who will no longer let you use the software, and maybe your computer can't be upgraded anymore. This is a problem for sort of all users of technology, but it's particularly horrifying in the case of disability technologies, especially ones that, like this cochlear implant in India, where we see what Michelle Friedner calls planned abandonment, right? Going above planned obsolescence. This obsolescence is directly related to sort of abandoning people after you've had this feel-good moment of giving them the technology, completely letting them down. We also see more and more issues pop up with different software issues. Here are two different stories from two different times. So one of them is from 2024, and the other one is from 2019. One of the headlines is more than 200 people with diabetes injured after software issue drained insulin pump batteries. Right, people got an update, and the update had a bug in it, and all of a sudden their insulin pumps were dead much sooner in ways that caused big issues for them. And this other one from 2019, you might, if you can read very fine print, it says December 2nd, 2019. And the headline is Parents of Children with Diabetes are furious following the blackout of a major blood sugar monitoring software. In this case, during Thanksgiving weekend, uh, diabetes monitoring software in a wearable device, a Dexcom, um, stopped sending alerts to people's phones about when people's blood sugar got too high or too low, and they were lucky no one died because Thanksgiving weekend in the United States is a time where people eat abnormally. And in fact, some of them, like some people were sent to the hospital, shaking them awake in the night and trying to get blood sugar levels back up. And this reports particularly the voices of parents with children of diabetes, but there were plenty of diabetic people in this who were also very upset. This reporting also centered non-disabled people in particular ways, but it points to the worries of um, for so many medical devices they are so important to our lives, like continuing to live our lives, that a software glitch could be very, very deadly in many cases, and should present particular worries. And this is for a technology a lot of disabled people like. People in general like the Dexcom technology. It's not something we would decry in general, but some of the ways it's managed and understood um, still present people problems. And I think this is our final case. I find this one perhaps the most upsetting of all of these. So this is an article from 2023 from MIT Technology Review. The title is "A Brain Implant Changed Her Life, Then It Was Removed Against Her Will." It is the story of Rita Leggett, who had a seizure disorder that kept her from leaving her home. Right. She had had too many instances where she had had seizures in public that had left her vulnerable in particular ways, or people reading her as like on substances, or as drunk in public, or had you know the consequences of hitting your head, or being found on a bus and unresponsive. um, she had basically decided not to have a public life anymore because of her medical situation, and then she was offered this brain implant as part of a study. And the brain implant that she got, and that others in this clinical trial received, is like would alert her when she was about to have a seizure so that she could get in position, get to safety, and have her seizure. Right. So this was a notification technology. Um, and for the other people enrolled in the study, um, they did not have the significant results that she did. She talks about like being liberated by this device that became part of her, that she could be out and about in the world as a cyborg, as someone with this device that would let her know when her seizures were coming. It is one of the things that we would talk about as a life-changing technology legitimately for Rita Leggett. Um, However, other people in this trial did not have the positive results that she did. And so when they decided that the trial was over and that they wouldn't be pursuing this technology, they had people get their brain implants removed. And Rita Leggett begged and pleaded to let them keep her brain implant as long as she could, until it stopped working, even without maintenance. She just wanted to keep it for as long as possible. And she was told no, and she was forced to have it removed, an involuntary surgery to have this brain implant removed. She was doing all the things we're supposed to do as good Crips. She was pursuing a life-changing technology. She participated in this. She had the good results that we want to have. And it was all taken away. And she talks about, it is this life-changing technology, having it taken away was life-changing in its own respect as well. So I think what it means to be like a disabled participant in some of this research, sometimes you're making yourself more vulnerable, right? You have to get another brain surgery. In her case, not even just switching something off and on, or trying something outside of your body. Especially as we see a lot of high-tech things and brain implants come on the scene. I think we should have a lot of worries about what it means as disabled people to participate in these things. Which brings us to what cyborgs know. Um, uh, Damien, I forget
Yeah.
which of us was going to take this. Is it me or you?
I I can do this. I want to because I want to go. Actually, I was thinking about going a little bit quickly so we can get to our consulting
Okay.
runs as quick as possible. So I'm gonna move through this a little bit quickly, everybody, because we want to get to the point where we talk to you about what we can do about all this, where we can model the things that we can do. Like we've talked about a lot of things, and what cyborgs know is one of the major components of this, right? We know that in this space, we have something different that we can do here. We have some different ways of being and thinking about these things. When we recenter expertise in these cases, when we think differently about who gets to be a knower and who gets to be an expert, we're not focusing so much on the person who designed the thing for somebody else. Too often, test subjects are subjects. They are subjectified. They are made to bear the brunt of certain things rather than actually having agency and a meaningful kind of input in this space, being the ones who design it themselves, being the ones who write these things themselves. Disabled people are designers, and we should be recognized as such. We're designers, we're redesigners, we are people who have to innovate on the technologies that make our lives function. We go to the next one, and then I guess we'll go into Astro Access. One of the things that we are thinking about here is the ways that these frameworks have implications not just for the lived experience of disabled people, but also for everyone. This is from the group Mission Astro Access. They're a group that focuses on disability experiences of space. Let's note that accessibility spurs innovation that benefits all users. Oftentimes we talk about the curb cut effect. We talk about things that benefit people because that are implemented for disabled people, but then end up benefiting everybody. But this is true at all levels of technology. And it's not just the case that we're looking at something, so futuristic because, oh, it's this amazing potential thing, but it's also because these are different ways of thinking about the future and thinking about how we shape what's possible, how we even tell stories about what might be possible. And so this vision of being able to make space travel more accessible, being able to make brain implants more directed by the people for whom they are intended to be used. These ideas have to be centered around disabled people as experts, people who know something and whose expression of knowledge and holding of knowledge is valid. And this is what we model in our consulting. So Discotech Consulting is this framework that we've done, as Ashley said, we've done it with the the funding of a Mellon Foundation grant. And we are in the process of putting all of these things that we've been talking about into practice, centering CRIP expertise in research projects. It's not focus groups, and they're not the same things as user-centered design. This is consultation. Now, here I will hand it back to Ashley.
Oh yeah, thank you so much. So some of the ways in which we're setting up this project, noticing these gaps, and I don't think what we are suggesting is the only way to do research like this, but we're recognizing that there is a need to think about how we might reorganize, like how some of these things are done. In a beautiful, different world, we would have a pipeline of disabled people in every profession, where we would have designers that already have the degrees. We know that people, because of academic ableism, don't always make it to the places that they want to. And I think even if you're a non-expert in a field, you might have a lot to say about, hey, how we distribute cochlear implants or how we think about, what sort of contract we might want to have if we're entering into a brain implant study, right? These very, basic things about like how we structure some of this. So one of the ways in which we're doing this is Discotech, Disability Community Technology Consulting. And so we're trying to counter this notion that disabled people are the objects of help, but also like the way to throw us in isn't like, I know some people do like one-on-one design interviews for particular objects for particular people. That doesn't necessarily get you to a device that like lots of people can use. We also see disabled people brought in as human subjects when people already like have the parameters defined. So I think about this. We've had some consulting projects where a team is like, oh, this is for blind people. And everyone in our group is like, it's not for blind people, but here are some other people who would like this technology. You didn't talk to any blind people. Blind people didn't have the problems you think they have. But in fact, we have different people in our group that say, oh, actually, I have MS and I can imagine using something like this. I'm giving a specific example that Damien knows about now. So our current research is about sort of cross-community work in this way. So we really care about having multiply disabled people involved in research, right? So many times we get a device that might serve one population, but you can tell by the way it's designed that they don't even know common comorbidities that have to do with that particular population they're looked at. I'm thinking particularly of sort of this gauge for blood sugar that was being used where it didn't have an auditory readout. Um, and, oftentimes people with diabetes who uh, diabetes can cause blindness and amputations. There, that's what I'm saying. So it just showed that they just chose people with diabetes and like excluded other groups that also have diabetes, but might need different different systems, different readouts. I think about how some of these technologies actually would do much better if you consider the fact that most disabled people are multiply disabled and work from there. We have to do a whole bunch of pre-planning as part of this, and that's really fun to figure out how to do that in terms of like what we need to know to get a session off of the ground. We, as a research team, are trying to anticipate multiple ways of communicating or participating in dialogue. So we don't make people like test out things. They can watch if they want to. They don't have to talk if they don't want to. They can report later, and like through any one of a number of means, they can get back to us about their thoughts about anything related to the session. Um, our expectations for these consulting sessions, we recruit from widely from the community. We want people we select for diversity of disability type. Um, and we try to build in breaks and build things in a way that allows different people of different disability types and multiple disabilities to interact with each other. We pay people as consultants. This is significant. It's not another project where disabled people are asked for free labor. In our ideal world, people would build into their grant applications in the future money to pay disabled people as consultants or as an advisory board or as something more comprehensive than a human subject where you could get a $25 Target gift card. No, we are paying disabled people from our community right now, $100 an hour to come out to different sessions and then have conversations usually with each other about their thoughts about the technology. And we think it's really important that researchers see disabled people have different opinions from one another, right? So sometimes you bring in that accessibility consultant or one disabled person, and none of us have all the ways of being disabled. So it's really important to actually witness different perspectives, and some of which, are unrelated to disability, but there are lots of different perspectives disabled people could have. And unlike a focus group where there's like a focus, we can go any direction we want in honoring their expertise. And we talk about our disabled consultants as experts about, lived experience, about disability and technology. And they definitely are. So this is not human subjects research, but sort of paid consulting that sort of recenters expertise. Because when you're thinking about someone as a human subject or even as a co-designer, the sort of hierarchy that exists in that relationship is really tricky to manage, and it's never their names at the end of the paper. To that end, we try to make sure that people's names are used or the alias that they would like to be called. We're not naming our subjects our own thoughts about what they should be named in whatever paper we're using, but instead people consult as experts under their own names or as aliases they choose for themselves. That way they could be thanked in acknowledgments in the future and not just lost. I feel forever irritated when I read something and I never find out who the people are historically that I'm really interested in. So this cross-disability dialogue, we can use like different conversations about different use cases and who would benefit or who would be excluded. It goes really well. Um, we get some really cool questions. Damien, do you want to add in here? I don't want to
Yeah.
monologue.
Yeah, no, the questions are actually some of the most important parts to me, and I'm mindful of our time, but the questions is really kind of important because the questions that we get from our consultants are often surprising to the research teams that they consult with because they are questions that once they are asked seemed obvious in some cases, but also extraordinarily informative. We've had multiple instances where our research teams have kind of reframed a number of things because the questions that were asked opened up ideas and possibilities for what the researchers were building in ways that they simply had not previously considered or anticipated, but which were always present in the technologies that they were building if seen from a particular lived experience. And that's kind of the crucial point there, right? Like it took the experiences, the perspectives of multiple different kinds of lived disability knowledge to really open up those possibilities and highlight them for people who just did not have that direct experience for themselves. And this actually kind of brings us to this last point of access friction. Even when things go wrong, they are moments where we have been able to learn and develop things in certain kinds of ways. Places where the space that our consultants have been meaning to test in has been inaccessible. Um, we have wheelchair users who could not get into the space because it was a raised platform. And during the Q&A, if you are interested in learning more about that, Ashley can tell you the story of what had to happen that day. But even that moment was something where the people who were doing this work had to stop and confront the fact that they were ostensibly working with and had planned to work with consultants, disabled consultants on a project, and had not made the space accessible. And we had to work around and about what that meant and then figure out how to solve that problem. It becomes a moment in which we can all build out more. With that, yeah, thank you everybody for your time and your attention. I do want to make sure we get our break, and sorry for running a little bit long.
Yeah, thank you.
Amazing.
We hope you'll
Thank
stick
you.
around for Q&A too. Yeah, thank you. I'm gonna stop share.
Alrighty. Thank you so much, Ashley and Damien. That was really, really generative and really well thought out. And we really appreciate you coming and chatting with us about this topic. For now, folks, we will go on we'll make it a 7-minute break. So we will come back at 11:15. I believe that is the correct math. And we will have our Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Zoom Q&A so our speakers can be able to address them and keep the chats going in Discord. We'll see you at 11:15. All right. So Ashley and Damien, you guys are going to trade questions back and forth, and I'll keep an eye in the chat just in case, just so we don't lose any as we go. Feel free to start wherever you're comfortable.
Thank you.
Damien, can I ask you? Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead.
Sorry, I had turned my volume down, so I wasn't hearing very well. I like this question from Christina Francois that says, "Oh, how has the participation of disabled researchers or facilitators impacted conducting the study? Have we received any pushback?"
Oh, that is a very good question. I don't know if I'd characterize it as pushback per se, but I will note that there has been a couple of instances where people have had maybe a little bit of difficulty getting their heads around the idea of disabled-led consulting in that research framework, right? And so one of the things that I've kind of taken to saying to people when we get in contact with them is like, imagine if this was, not some outside consultant that you were just getting the sense of, or like a focus group that you're trying to put together, but imagine it was me. This is me, a researcher who's not necessarily in your field or in your department, but we are talking about possibly collaborating on some research. How would you talk to me? How would you work with me? And it causes people to kind of confront and reframe how they think about how they treat the people that they oftentimes work with in these research environments in this kind of fundamental way, because it makes them realize they haven't been thinking about the people in these spaces, especially disabled people, as people with expertise and people with knowledge who know things, who can do things, and who have something valuable to add rather than something that they can have extracted from them. And that changes the dynamic pretty immediately.
Yeah. Can I also add, we've had pushback from one of the consultants at one point, or from a group of the consultants. We had a really wonderful session. Not really wonderful because it was going well, but the research team kept trying to treat it like a focus group and like wanted to walk us through individual like widgets on a particular app, and so kept like directing people to ask them like very specific questions about like how things were laid out on like a web page. And our consultants actually like butted in when we're like, I think one of them even said, you know, we're here to consult. We want the high level picture of your project before we
Exactly.
look at any of these details. Right?
Exactly.
They didn't want to start at like, oh, here's how we walk through. And like the researchers had kept trying to direct people, and people wanted to have these conversations about like, why does this matter? Why are the designers doing these things? And
Right.
not just like, is it
What
screen
is it?
readable?
Right. Like this research and who is it supposed to be for? Like was like the kind of main thing. Yeah. And so that's no, thank you for that, because yeah,
It was
the place
amazing.
pushback has been pushback from our consultants at the framing of the research team. And it was, yeah, it was amazing, because that goes back to that thing that I said before. It's like, even when things have gone wrong, we have gotten the ability to like have, it's corny, a teachable moment. We have the ability to like have the researchers kind of stop and go, no, seriously, how are you thinking about the people that you are working with right now? Because right now you're treating them like a focus group, and they are treating you, or trying to treat you, like research partners,
Yeah.
and not equal right now. So
And, and the attitude was really one like, we're consultants. Like, don't waste our time, and like our time is valuable, because we actually
yeah,
ended up having a session afterward where the consultants could come and talk to us about how it went, just because it was such like it deviated from our normal so much, because they kept trying to, because the researchers themselves were in focus group mode. And we had a number of consultants who had been to other sessions, because it's not like the same group of people each time. We recruit fresh for each session. And but we had some of the like people who had been in a few times, and they were like, "Oh no, this is not our work." It was just a delight.
it
Yeah.
was. Yeah, so that is, I think, the clearest way to think about like how it changes the nature of the work, the study itself, right? Like it, when disabled people are treated as and recognize themselves as experts, something really important and generative and different happens in that space. And when they are not, and are in a space of being able to recognize, hey, we're not being treated with the respect and the consideration that we are due in this context, that also changes the nature of that interaction in a really important and impactful way.
All right. Do you want me to ask you another question? I've got some.
I was gonna ask you one.
All right.
Um, ah, from Ali Masood, beyond foundation funding or corporate consulting, how do we build disabled community power to recenter expertise? What are our roots or strategies for making a more just world, not dependent on the whims of the owners of concentrated privately held wealth?
So one of the things that we're doing with this project, which we think about as like a regional project, right, is through Damien University at UNC Charlotte, and through Virginia Tech and the Blacksburg campus. So sort of located on the edge of Appalachia, in the mountains of North Carolina and Virginia. And a lot of how we think about these consulting sessions has to do with actually building community. I think it's really important to be in a cross-disability community, and there are a lot of forces that push us away from each other, especially in places that don't have very good transportation, frankly, or good infrastructure, where we are living. A lot of people don't have internet at their house, um, or don't have, aren't located on a bus route. It actually, one of the things that this grant lets us do is, pay for some of the things to get people in a place, if they need help getting to where we are, if we're doing this in a location. And even when we're doing things that are like online things, we'll bring people and sit in a computer lab, at Virginia Tech. So it's not just like, how do we build community power? We have to meet each other. We have to think about ourselves as a community. So one of the things this grant has let us do is do these discotheque consulting sessions, which are fun. And I think for people who wouldn't, say, show up for a disability-based event, they will show up to talk about technology, or to like, sometimes we tell them what sorts of technologies they'll be trying out if they come to a session, and sometimes they're interested in a specific technology, and what they end up having is a conversation with other disabled people, like before and after. Often times we have to book the space for much longer than we expect to have it. We try not to have our consulting sessions run too long, just as a matter of, I can't focus that long personally. And we always have people who want to linger and just talk to each other after, right? To me, that's a success. Even if the research consulting part wasn't a complete success, like, we have people who wouldn't have met each other otherwise, disabled people in our region, in our community. We also, as part of this grant, our colleague Elizabeth, who's in musicology, we're allowed to invite in disabled artists for educational events. And we've had Anita Cameron working on her memoir in an artist residency. And then we had an event where she was reading from parts of her memoir. Now, that was an online event. We're going to be having some people come through in the coming year or two. And that allows us to build in things where we're recognizing disabled talent and expertise. So there's this arts component that we haven't really talked about that we think is really important to this greater, like, community power, and declaring ourselves experts. Well, we're going to see other talented disabled people. We're going to meet each other. We're going to appreciate, like, oftentimes what other people are saying in our sessions. Like, we learn new things from, like, I learn things every time, and I'm not one of the consultants. I'm setting it up. I get to listen to all the conversations. It's even better. I get to make sure everyone gets paid, even better than that. And that's good. But, like, I've been amazed with some of the insights they've come up with, and then I see them, like, want to talk to each other about, like, well, how did you learn about that? Or, just even talking about, like, recreation in the area in a way that, yeah, people who wouldn't normally come to a disability centered event are coming to these, and that's really meaningful to us. That was a long answer, but thank you.
Long but good. That actually also gets at another one of the questions. I was just looking at the question from Jennifer Justice asked, talking more about how researchers find and retain our services. That's, some of the ways that we build community, and some of the ways that we have people reach out to us they overlap oftentimes. And it's I was actually I was talking to Ashley about this before. I was actually up at Northwestern last weekend for IEEE ethics. So it's a little bit interesting to be back with you all in distance. But at IEEE ethics, we presented some of this work and met a lot of people who wanted to then dig down on this work. And so people find us in all kinds of ways. They hear about us in conferences or through other teams that we've worked with, and they reach out to us, or we, find a very interesting group either in our universities or around our areas, and we reach out to them. It's we try to keep it as open as possible in that way. We want to make it a community thing. We want to make it something that's going to be relevant and meaningful to the people that we'll be working with, the people that will be our consultants. And so sometimes that looks very locally focused, and sometimes that looks like a very large uh, group, corporation, that has tools that might be relevant to many members of our group. And so that framework is kind of fluid in that way.
Yeah, and we've done 9 runs. No two have been even similar. We've done work consulting on like game design for a D&D accessible material group. We've had I guess our most recent was hmm?
It's an architectural robotics.
Architectural robotics, different web applications. Um, I mean, part of what's a delight for I think Damien and for me and for the graduate students that we get to work with is what we're trying to figure out ways we can make this work and like what is the best model for doing some of this. And it's nice to have the funding that lets us just try out different ways of setting this up. I don't think we have anything set in stone so far, and I wish there were more opportunities to just try things out in the world like this. Yeah. Um, I like this question from Karen Krolock, which I'm going to read out loud, but I don't think we have an answer for. Does anyone know how many of the programs that were cut by by the federal government this year have caused disabled users to lose function of tools placed on their bodies? Is anyone tracking that? I mean, Center for Democracy and Technology would be the only group that I would think of that would be tracking it, but I haven't. I would pay attention to them to answer that question at some point. Yeah.
Yeah, CDT does a lot of work in that. They are keeping an eye on it. There's no confirmed tally yet. Also, there's Kevin DeLeban, Diliban. He's got a new group called Tectonic Justice, like technology, tonic justice, and they're looking at engaging with multiple different types of impacts, artificial intelligence in particular, but technologies and proliferating technologies writ large, the kinds of impacts that are being had in this moment. He actually got started with that late last year, but has kind of ramped things up in the interim. So, but I met Kevin through work with the Center for Democracy and Technology, so those are not like disconnected things. Those are groups that have basically helped each other to flourish.
We have another question from Catherine Porter. Can you speak to the approach to keeping discotheque feasible, functional in the absence of grants/philanthropy? I know nonprofit sustainability can be problematic framing, but I'm not sure how else to ask that question. But since we're talking about harms caused by reifying resources that we don't have control over.
Yeah.
Okay, answer.
I've been thinking about this a lot this past week. Um, it's very, very heavily on my mind. Actually, when I was at Northwestern for IEEE Ethics, it was hosted by, fun fact, Ashley was my dissertation advisor. And another member of my dissertation committee was the host for IEEE Ethics last week, Sylvester Johnson. And he and I were talking about this exact problem and ways to think forward on that because we are in a moment where funding is under threat, where things that should be and publicly funded that would be a benefit to all are severely imperiled. And so that question of what is making sure that this continues to be a resource for all of us look like? We want this to be a community center that outlasts the lifespan of this grant by a lot. But what does that actually look like? It's still kind of up in the air. Fortunately, that is to say, I don't have any answers, but it's definitely on my mind, kind of heavy right now.
Yeah, and so we have funding through 2026. And I think about it all the time because I get stuck looking at the spreadsheets. But this is, it actually isn't very expensive for us to do this work. like it does cost labor on the part of Damien and me and some graduate students, right? So there is a cost to it. But I also think like in terms of paying disability groups, I've been asked to price this out. I actually have convinced some researchers on our campus at Virginia Tech to actually build this in on 2 grants. That they were putting up into the works, and like what would it mean? They're like, I would like to budget. Like you're telling me that this is something that we should budget for in our grants someday. Like I would like to try this. And I know the landscape for grants is changing, but I also think that we are offering so much value that once researchers have seen one of these sessions go down, they actually are thinking about how they could afford it. And it isn't that costly compared to a lot of things. I think about all the advisory boards that are made up of non-disabled experts that like get stipends to hear about research that's sometimes about disabled people. Like in fact, to run one of these sessions, when I think about the number of people that we put in, I mean, we estimated it between $2,000 and $4,000 if you were to pay people at their current rate and recruit a particular number of people. Like for the amount of value you're getting in what people are suggesting and the sort of outcome in terms of, what you like the testimony you can rely on. Like you can quote people who were part of this particular run, right? It's not anonymized. Um, there's a lot of value in that. And in the scheme of things, it's not nearly as costly as a lot of the things that go into grant applications. I don't know how to put that. Like we, at the same time, I think our community members are really excited to be paid at the level they are because sort of, what it means to be in part of research usually is it's not even full compensation for your time. It's
It's
yeah,
like a $50 gift card, like that's like the level of compensation can be in the maybe 25 to $50 range for some of these runs, right? And so it's not like for sorry, for things like focus groups and we're paying $100 an hour, that we're paying actual consulting rates, and we're still at a level where, as Ashley said, it's actually vastly cheaper to work with us as expert consultants and research partners than it is to pay some advisory board of non-disabled people. And it leads to better outcomes that you don't then have to fix after they've gone wrong, which is yet another saved cost, right? Like that. So if we're talking in purely economic terms for people who need it like sold to them, those are the kinds of arguments that we put forward. Right? You're saving costs at every level, and you're getting better outcomes from your research across the board.
Yeah, and I'm not, I think about how this fits into particular, like, I don't know, capitalist modes of doing research. At some point, I just want good things made and disabled people to have a role in that. And, um, I'm not thrilled. I wouldn't work with just like any company, but there are, places I think where I don't think my values are compromised in doing that work. Yeah, where things can be going better. And I don't feel like this is a hard sell for people to see the value of cross disability consulting because the outcomes in terms of products, right? Even if you just made your blood sugar alarm have a readout that says things aloud, right? Like you would get that from cross just like just from a basic knowledge, but from recognizing that people are multiply disabled and there's more, I guess, market share in that, I suppose. But what I want is for more people to have good technologies that serve them well. Yeah. And so sometimes that means interfacing with companies or with research programs that hope to sell some of this intellectual property at some point too.
Right.
There's a good question here, but it might be too big for us, Damien. So this one by Adam Kieta. I've been trying to read Right to Maim by Jasper Puar, and it talked about disability being a racializing process. It has been making me think about how right now a whole new class of amputees and disabled people is emerging from genocides like in Palestine, who cannot access care, while on the flip side, IOF soldiers who returned amputated will be afforded prosthetics and help. Can you tell us about how those lines are drawn societally between the undeserving disabled, those demoralized, racialized people who will be seen as undeserving because of their disability versus heroic disabled, those who can be tokenized for their disability and who are heroized and in return afforded access to care? I want to say I'm thinking of something Rua Williams said, a
I was
media.
literally just about to.
I wonder if we have the same quote or if it's just different ones. Rua is infinitely more quotable than I am, and Rua had a wonderful observation where they talked about how 5 or 10 years down the line, the U.S. will bring over some of the Palestinian amputees and celebrate the US for giving them prosthetics, right? Because we have so many of these moments of nationalism where, oh, we have this great technology, and we're helping people. We bring them over, fit them with the latest technology, and send them back. This is not like maybe you've seen news stories like this. I always think about like you need a lot of maintenance on a piece of technology like that, how just bringing people and sending them back doesn't actually give them any sort of like long-term help. So I have a critique of that in general, but like that we're going to use both sets of bodies to celebrate US nationalism through technological imperialism at some point. Um,
Yep.
I've said it in a much longer way than Ruwa did. Do you have a better summary of this, Damien?
Well, that is actually the kind of the core framing. But I was also thinking about Rua's and Liz Jackson's wheelchair to warfare pipeline,
Mm,
and an inverse relationship of this is like there's always been this relationship between militarization and disability, and technology for disability being developed, quote unquote, for disability. But it's really about, recovering warfighters, people who can then go back into a theater of war and continue to be effective soldiers, as it were, right? And so this notion of disability technology in that space is often about, not honoring the disabled soldiers, but is about making them functional in the context of war again, making them able to be war fighters again. And this is why you see so much focus on things like prosthetic arms and legs and exoskeletons in that space. But also in thinking about, the racialized lines of this, there's always been this context of disability as being differently felt along racial, class, and gender lines. Who is seen as the quote unquote right kind of disabled person, who has a disability that is celebrated versus one that is demonized, it often carries those intersectional markers and valences, right? Because it's always been about this intersection of ableism and white supremacy, ableism and violence. And that framework does persist, around the world and in multiple different contexts. The only ways I know of to kind of push back against it, or to push back against it, to highlight it, mark it out clearly, and then make people confront and reckon with those differences in how people are treated, those differences in how we regard disability in these different contexts, and who gets to be celebrated, who gets to have their needs met, and who doesn't, and why that is.
You ready for another question, Damien? Do we have
Yeah,
time for another question?
we got time for like maybe one more.
Yeah, we've got time for about one more question before we're gonna wrap up.
Oh, then it's a lot of pressure to choose the right one. Um, Ruth Hennel says, is there a space for consultants to bring their own ideas and explore them together? One of the big benefits for me of being in lived experience groups around housing is that I have a group of equals to share them with, and we can learn from and encourage each other.
There's a lot of collaboration work that happens in and around our consulting runs. And the people, as Ashley said before, like oftentimes want to hang out afterwards and collaborate and think together and talk about what just happened, but also talk about what to do next, what else they want to be involved in, what other kinds of ideas they want to work on. And this gets at one of the other questions I saw in there, people developing new interests as a result. People who have worked with us as consultants have found themselves intrigued by and interested in all kinds of things that they didn't necessarily think they were going to be, as well as having their interests, reinforced in the case of people who self-select for, say, the Dungeons and Dragons runs. Certain kind of person who's already going to want to get in on that, but there's also people who found themselves pleasantly surprised by being involved. And so the space for that opens up there, but also there are groups who find themselves involved. Some of our consultants have crypt community groups already and bring others in to our consulting space, but also take their consulting experiences back to those spaces and develop new avenues of engagement there as well. And we've seen that happen a few times, both around Virginia Tech and in Charlotte.
Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you all we've got a lot of questions. And so thank you for answering the ones that we were able to get to. I'm going to try to speak up because some folks were saying I was a little low. But thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Damien, for giving us this incredible talk and sharing with us your process and some of the things that you're working through in your project, as well as things that we can think about when we are also working through our research projects and thinking about community building and access and all of the work. Thank you. So thank you to our attendees, all 175 of you that showed up today. We really appreciated you coming out and supporting us and sharing your questions as well, and being in community with each other on Discord. There will be a next talk next Monday, that's June 23rd at 10 a.m. Central Time as well. And it will carry over some of the discussion that we've started having here about accessibility and access washing. So please be sure to register for that. I have just put the link in the chat. I also want to give a shout out to our captioner from Caption First and our amazing ASL interpreters from Pro Bono ASL. As a reminder, you can keep the conversation going on Discord. It's been great having you all, and thank you again to Ashley and Damien.
Thank you so much.
End the recording now.
Thank you all.